Hello, friends, and welcome back to Liam Teaches Chess. Today, I'm continuing the series where I review my tournament games, at least until I hit 2000 USCF, United States Chess Federation rating. Today, I'm playing a local Swiss, meaning you play 4 games. When you win, you usually play a winner. When you lose, you usually play a loser. My live rating's sitting around 1860, so need a couple good tournaments, a bit away from 2000. And I'm playing with the white pieces in round one against a player by the name of Oxford. Oxford is a kid around probably 11, and he's rated below 1,000, but he had a good tournament where he beat a 1,700. He beat a 1,500 in this tournament, so he's clearly an improving youngster. And I had seen him play in the club before, mainly because I teach one of the guys at the club. And so I open C4, the English. He responds E5, G3, knight C6, bishop G2, knight F6, knight F3, and bishop C5. Where already I'm thinking about the center fork trick where I go knight takes, and then D4, forking the bishop and the knight. Now, I didn't opt to go for this mainly because, usually this opportunity doesn't arise in English. It's more of an E4 opening. So I don't play the position a lot. Obviously, if you do take the knight, black can respond many different ways. They can sack their bishop and then capture back. They can take d4 and then retreat their bishop to defend their knight. They can take d4 and pick up your c-pawn. So there is a lot to look at here, but if you go for this right away, it's just an outright blunder because, of course, d4 does fork the pieces, but it also opens up this diagonal to your king. So black gains a tempo, bishop b4, unforking their pieces. You respond, bishop d2, in which case they could trade and then save their knight either by capturing on c4 or retreating their knight, and you just lose a piece. I decided to castle, and my opponent castled. They're supposed to play the move pawn d6 to prevent the center fork trick here. They did castle, though. Pretty common at Oxford's level here, where not as familiar with the opening, just playing natural moves. And then I do nab the pawn here. Again, I think taking on f2 is probably black's best response, where, okay, yes, they've given up a bishop. But maybe this g4 square their knights can make use of. White is for choice here. They're actually supposed to sack this pawn back, something I didn't know. But it's not what he played. He took on instinct. And even if you are not super familiar with the center fork trick like I did, you really should go for it. This tournament, by the way, today is game 25, which is very fast for classic time controls. It's the fastest you can have and be a classic time control. So game 25 very quickly turns into rapid, very quickly turns into blitz. And the psychological advantage you get when you sack this piece and your opponent's like, oh no, did I make a mistake in the opening is just alone worth something. And so, I'm not surprised that he just took back right away on instinct. He obviously didn't anticipate this, and so he just captured back. He didn't pause, where maybe if he did, maybe he would have taken on f2, but he took on e5. I played d4. If you take with the knight like this, I'm capturing back your bishop, and maybe your knight gets caught off sides here, where you really only have a couple safe squares to retreat to. And so he elected to give up his bishop. If he plays bishop d6, I can respond with c5. And if you move the bishop, I take your knight and hit your other knight, so you can't capture my c-pawn. And if you take like this, I just have a strong advanced pawn, limiting you from playing d6, getting your bishop in the game. And again, your knight's a little awkwardly placed. So he elected to just give the bishop. I took with the queen, a nice centralized queen now, and he retreated his knight. And here I did think for a little bit, because I'm trying to decide, where do I want my queen? Do I want to go to d3? I don't really want to go to d1, back to the starting square. I'm aware of this move knight b4 if I go d3. I think the best move here is probably queen d2, which looks weird because it blocks your bishop. But the point is, you're going to play b3, creating a pawn chain. You're going to play bishop b2, pointing your bishop at the king, and your queen keeps the bishop safe. It keeps the e-pawn safe. It keeps the c3 square open for the knight. I did play queen d3, though, planning to play bishop b2 or b3, bishop b2. I thought queen d3 also prevented the bishop from coming to f5. It points at the king. It's in the center still. And knight b4 is not really a move to worry about. He played h6, clearly worried about bishop g5, pinning his knight to his queen. I played knight c3. He played d6, allowing his light squared bishop to get in the game. And I did play b3. And here he played knight b4, hitting my queen. And I responded with queen d2, planning to play bishop b2. So probably should have just played queen d2 originally. However, I think it could be argued that knight b4 is a waste of a move by black, where, okay, yeah, you made a one move thing. You hit my queen. You are opening up the f5 square for your bishop. So you've achieved a little bit, I guess. But what's your knight doing here? Bishop f5, I can respond with e4. I think I can also develop my piece, right? Like, you're not forking anything on c2. You're just hitting my rook. So he did respond with bishop f5. And here I played e4, hitting the bishop. I think white's best move here is take on b7, go back to a move like g2 or f3, and then against knight c2, you just play e4. They take your rook, I take the bishop, and this knight is not going to escape, right? They can sack itself, but if they don't, I'm going to play bishop b2 and win the knight. So they can grab a pawn, something like this, and when the dust settles, rook for rook, knight for knight, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns versus 6 pawns. So down a pawn. However, 2 bishops versus a rook would be considered a strong advantage for white. Yes, my pawns are a little bit weird here. All these lines aren't exactly forced to. I can probably defend my B pawn with a move like queen c2, queen b2. But the bishops are just going to be able to wreak havoc here and are considered just much better than a rook in general. But that's not what I did. I did just go for e4, and the bishop went to g6. And I think it could be argued that the bishop is just a little bit misplaced on g6. Yes, it's on this diagonal, but I think, maybe you would want to transfer this bishop over to c6 one day to offset my best minor piece, this light squared bishop. And eventually I'm just going to move the pieces to like the center. And then this bishop is just staring at space, right? And so it's like, sure, you have this bishop, but it's a little bit awkward. It can be harassed with pawns. So just not really like fully thinking about where black wants all its pieces, just making threats is I guess my opponent's mistake. I play bishop b2, developing my bishop. He plays rook e8, and then I set a trap with rook d1 where black is attacking e4 once, twice, 3 times, and I'm only defending twice. Obviously, I could have responded with rook fe1, defending my pawn 3 times, but I played rook a d1, hoping that black just blunders, right? Just moves too quick and just grabs the free pawn, because my response would be something like knight takes e4, and then if you take back the piece, your undefended knight becomes an issue where I'm simply just up a full piece here. And so I did play rook d1, just hoping he, was like, oh, he didn't see a free pawn, right? So I don't know, a little bit of hope chess, but it's also like rook a d1 is an improving move. I'm going to play rook fe1 next turn if he does see the mistake or the trick. And he responded with a5, defending his knight. And I was like, okay, fine, rook fe1. And then he played queen d7, which right away felt off for me, right? If we just take tally of white versus black here, white's up a lot of tempi, right? Where white has developed all their pieces, so has black. But white has both rooks in the center. Black has 1 rook in the center. White has their queen off the back rank. Black just got their queen off the back rank. And so this rook is not in the game yet. And this knight is like, what's the knight doing here, right? It's kind of just misplaced. I think it would rather be on c6 and like maybe go to e5. And so I played the move e5, where the point is, this is an X-ray tactic where my queen and rook are attacking this queen twice. It's only defended once. So if you take with the pawn, I simply take, take, and take, winning a piece. If you take with the rook, I simply take, take, and then again, winning a piece. And if you do what he did in the game, which was move the knight, right? Because if you don't do anything, I'm going to take your knight. Um, but if you which move your knight, what I do is I take on d6, and the whole point is I'm trying to create a weakness, something that weaker players don't always consider, but stronger players do. I'm not always the best at it myself, but you want to chess is a game of creating and targeting weaknesses at a higher level where they say if you can just create multiple weaknesses, you're going to win the game, right? They call it the principle of two weaknesses at least, where one weakness you can usually defend, more than one, your position starts to unravel. So I had to calculate a bit before I just took on d6, right? Because of course black can exchange the rooks with check, which is what he did, and I took back with the rook. And then really the thing I had to calculate before I did all this was stuff like knight d3, hitting the bishop and the rook, which I think I can just play rook d1. You take my bishop, I take the knight back. He didn't do anything like that though. He did just take with the queen. If he takes with the pawn, I probably just play something like rook d1, targeting the weak d pawn. I have moves like knight b5 to put pressure on the pawn as well. But he took with the queen. I exchanged queens, creating an isolated pawn, a pawn that no teammates defend, a weakness for the long term. I control the square in front of the weak pawn as well 3 times, so you can never really free yourself by playing d5. And then, of course, I just take the free pawn on b7. So not only do I have a weakness, but I also just am up a pawn here. And I have the bishop pair. So white has several advantages. They're up a pawn. We have the bishop pair for ourselves in an open position. And we have 2 weak isolated pawns where my pawn structure is significantly better, right? You could say this is a weakness, hard to get at. And then these are my weaknesses, which are defended. He plays rook b8, hitting my bishop, and I retreat the bishop to e4. Like bishop f3 is a move to consider, but then knight e5 seems like a move he wants to play anyway. So bishop e4, my idea was just to try to trade material. I'm winning, and then target this pawn and eventually win the game. He trades bishops, and I take with the rook, which is maybe a little bit hasty because taking with the rook is actually fine. It gains, a tempo on the knight. But what was kind of hasty is I didn't calculate at all moves like knight takes f2, which my opponent did play, which it turns out to be a blunder basically. But anytime there are multiple knights on your side of the board, you need to be calculating these captures because knight takes f2, king takes f2, knight d3 is the point where you fork my bishop and king. And so captures combined with checks, right? So blacks thinks they're finding a way to win back the pawn, but what I calculated pretty quickly, again, we're playing game 25, is that, I simply take back with my king, and after knight d3, I'm going to run my king over here, and when your knight takes back my bishop, your knight is running out of squares to escape, right? Can't go over here, can't go off the board, so I think I'm just trapping your knight. So I play king e2, he takes my bishop, I play king d2, he plays a4, right? Trying to get me to capture or capture. And then I play king c2, hitting the knight, and he plays a3, protecting his knight for now, but the knight's out of the game, and I'm going to be able to win this pawn. So I think going back here, this is a common mistake for players where they see a tactic and they just go for it. They don't pause and calculate just a little bit deeper, right? Just a little bit deeper. Their tactical vision isn't there where their alarms aren't going off that, maybe this piece is dangerous to get. They don't realize that you might get trapped. So a common mistake by my opponent here. And then after a2, I originally had planned to play the move knight b5, hitting a3, hitting d6, but I realized that d5 might be annoying, right? If I take the pawn, I lose my rook. I lose my knight. If I take this pawn, I lose my rook. Now, this is probably fine for me. I can probably play something like rook d4, takes, but now I kind of have a weakness that black can maybe get to. the knight can escape to a4. And so rather than go for all that, I simply went knight b1. And computer's best move is probably something like rook d4, just shutting down these ideas. I think I was hallucinating issues with this, which of course is nothing, but I played knight b1. And again, I think d5 is black's best practical try, where the point is I take and then rook c8 at least stops me from winning the knight for now. Maybe you have dreams of getting in. Um, but he played the very natural move rook a8, just defending his pawn. And now I simply sack the knight. The rook captures back, and I take the knight, winning a pawn. And so now we've reached an endgame with 5 pawns versus 4 and a rook. King and rook endgames are the most popular. And, this game would be drawish maybe if, like, he had 2 pawns here. As far as, like, defending endgames, a rook endgame only down a pawn is a draw a lot of the time with best play. But the issue for white is that my A and B pawn have no resistance from enemy pawns. So they are going to be very quick coming up the board. And then black's majority is facing 2 pawns of my own. It's going to be too slow. I'm also going to have the more active rook. I'm going to have the more active king. And so all these things combined just make this a pretty easy endgame to win. My opponent plays rook a8. Mind you, if they played something like rook a7, I think, like a lot of beginner players might play something like rook e8, checking the king. And this is just not very good because you are forcing the king to get active with the move like king h7, king g6. And, like you think you're pressuring the pawn, but you're actually activating the enemy king. And what have you gotten for it? You've just moved your rook. So resisting the temptation to just do a random check just to do it and thinking about, actually, I want this king stuck on the back rank, right? Like, I don't want this king on h3 where now I have to think about like who's winning the race. And so after rook e8, I play rook e7, tying the king down to the f pawn, right? You can't lose this pawn, and planning to get rook d7 and behind the d6 pawn. He stops that with rook d8, and now I start pushing my passed pawns with b4. Black plays d5, trying to get rid of one of their weaknesses. I can play c5 here, and this is probably fine for me, but no sense to make this complicated. I take on d5, the rook takes back, and then I just simply play rook c7. And again, I'm sure I can just start going for it, and I can allow these checks and capturing here and all this, but no need. There's just no need here where any rook d2 is simply going to be met with rook c2, and trading would be easily a losing decision for black, where white, if not just promoting these pawns, can make the king come get them, and then your king races over here and gets these pawns, and you promote over here. So keeping the game simple, right? Winning but simple. My opponent plays king d4, and I play king b3, getting my king up. He plays rook d2. I slide my rook back to c2. He plays king d3. I activate my king further with c4. He plays a3, and I simply play b5. He plays king f8, getting his king in the game. I play king b4, chasing the rook away from a3, and then pushing my majority to a4. The rook on c2 also does a nice job of cutting out the king from my 2 pawns, where the rook is it just cannot stop 2 pawns and the king, let alone 2 pawns. So f5 is the retort, b6, king e7, king b5, king d6. And like, I'm not even really like calculating everything super hard because I simply don't need to. I just know that I can push the pawns, push the king, and there's really nothing to calculate. I just know I'm going to get a queen by force, and there's really nothing to worry about. It's just too slow. So a5, rook e8. And here I did just have to calculate one step, right? Like, okay, do I want to play king a6? Do I want to insert a check with rook c6? Do I want to play rook c5, stopping checks to myself? Or do I want to do what I did in the game, was simply play b7? And the point is that rook e5 is met with king b6, where I'm winning 15 different ways. If you go back to stop the pawn, I mean, I could push the pawn. I could probably even play king a7, or rook c8 seems pretty simple, interfering with the rook stopping the pawn from queening. And so he did resign after b7. So a pretty nice, easy win in round one, which brings me to round two, where I'm playing with the black pieces against a player by the name of Josh. He's rated 2100. So, almost over 200 points higher rated than me. And he plays E4. He just started playing again recently. And my main responses are D5, the Scandi, and C5. And I wish, but didn't play the Sicilian because I knew he played some like gambit lines, which I'm not fully booked up on. And again, we're playing game 25, and the Scandi is something I play in Blitz a lot. So I knew I'd be able to play the position pretty fast. Um, he takes, I play knight f6, knight c3, I take the pawn, bishop c4, e6, defending the knight. There's a lot of different responses you can do here. You can do knight b6 too. Um, Knight f3, developing his knight, bishop e7, d4, castles, castles, take on c3, take back, and then knight d7 with the idea of putting it to f6, plugging up d5, rook e1, knight f6, bishop g5, h6, hitting the bishop. I don't think I should play this move, h6. There's really nothing to worry about right now. I should probably just focus on developing my pieces. But I do. He plays bishop d2, and I do play b6 with the idea of bishop b7. And he plays queen c1, clearly with the idea of sacrificing on h6. And I really only thought for a little bit here, where I think that alone is a mistake. Like, this is something you probably need to calculate hard. And what I thought was, okay, bishop b7, take, or bishop b7, take the knight. Um, you know, they take back, take, queen takes, and I think I'm okay, is what I decided. Turns out the best move from the engine here is simply h5, asking white why they did this. Right? Because bishop h6, I think you can just ignore. You just ignore it. You just continuing developing, and you're like, okay. Although queen g5, 98, defending checkmate, uh, losing a pawn. I don't know. It's all very complicated, and I mean, no one likes to get attacked in chess. It's hard to defend, and I didn't do a good job at all. I played bishop b7. He took on h6. I took back. He took on h6. I took with the knight. And then the move I didn't see from afar, with me playing knight h7, preparing to play stuff like bishop g5, queen e6, the move I didn't see at all was bishop d3, simply rerouting the bishop to a better diagonal. And here I realized I messed up. I messed up because I'm just lost here, right? He's threatening checkmate, so moving the knight, maybe I can entertain, but it's all going to come crashing down on me. Me taking on f3 actually is going to work hugely to my disadvantage, because he's simply going to play king h1 and rook g1 and, mating me. I can't run my king. And so I play f5. Yeah, I see this check, but he takes. I play rook f7, stopping it for now. And then again, he reroutes the bishop again. So the bishop just absolutely owned me in this game. And I'm just lost, like, right out of the opening. Very disappointing game for me, where like I think openings are definitely a weakness of mine at this level, where, and so that's why I've always played the Scandi, just trying to get people out of book. But what I've decided is that this is going to be my last Scandinavian tournament game for at least a long time, with the idea that, if I had lost a Sicilian, at least I would learn another step in the theory. At least I would improve, and that it's just like there's just no need to play suboptimal openings. Even when you know them pretty well. Like, I've had some good results with the Scandi, but I don't know. Like, it is a little results oriented to just be like, oh, I'm not playing it because I got crushed in this game, right? Like, after h5, the engine thinks I'm totally fine, but it's just, as someone that doesn't even play e4, I like facing the Scandi, so I'm done with it. I'm gonna play the Sicilian, or I might switch to e5. I kind of think that might fit my style. And for better or worse, I'm gonna stick with these openings. There's going to be losses. There's gonna be painful losses, but in general, I think I'll just be a better player in the long run, which is what it's about, right? So yeah, he reroutes the bishop here, and yeah, I mean, I think for a while here, there's no good moves. I play knight g5. He takes my bishop. My rook is pinned to the king. I insert a check, knowing this doesn't do anything. I take his rook again, knowing I don't do anything, and then the game ends like this, where I'm just like making moves. There's nothing to do, and I get mated like so. And so a great game for my opponent, disappointing game for me where I don't feel like I even got a game, right? Like getting outplayed later, okay, that's fine to me. And yeah, I just need to commit some work to the opening phase of the game, whether that's Sicilian, whether that's E5. A lot of players like the opening. For me, I don't as much just because like, we're in the computer era. I kind of wish computers never touched chess and it was just the abilities of the player. It's more of a debate versus just the silicone engine telling you what it is. And like, I definitely don't want to be playing openings, which you know teenagers and children have spent hours just looking at the computer, clicking spacebar, and being like, just playing memorized moves. Like that's not chess to me, right? That's work, right? And chess to me is like more of a game of like what creativity and everything like that. So it is what it is, but I'm going to commit to just playing a different response against e4. And so, yeah, lost this game pretty handily, bringing us to game three, where I'm playing a player by the name of Prajwa. He's around 1300. He's probably around 13 to 14 years old. So a little unfortunate that I got the white pieces against the lower rated opponents, but it's just going to be like that in the Swisses sometimes. Again, I played the English. He responded with a symmetrical. We both fianchettled our bishops. He played e6 to prepare d5. I castled. He plays knight e7, not blocking his bishop. I played knight c3, knight b c6, and then I played e3, preparing to play d4. He plays d5. I took, and I played d4, and I took back. And so we both have these isolated pawns. It's pretty symmetrical other than the fact that his knight's on e7 and my knight's on f3. So I'm probably considered just a little bit better just because of my knight being on the third rank and his on the seventh or the second. But he can, put further pressure on my d pawn. He plays h6. I play rook e1, developing my rook, lining it up with the king. He castles, and I play knight e5. Trying to get vision on this d5 pawn, maybe playing moves like queen b3 in the future, advancing my knight. He responds with bishop e6, so kind of a solid, boring response, right? Like this bishop is not a good piece, but it does defend the pawn for now. And so he's just, like a draw would be a happy result for him. And so he plays bishop e6, not a very trying move. And here I did think for a while because I'm just really not sure like what to play. Like bishop f4, okay, g6 may be annoying. Bishop e3, I interfere with my rook defending my knight, where you can take twice. And so I sided knight a4 just because I thought, stopping queen b6 has some value, where that would be annoying, and trying to get my knight into c5, putting pressure on e6. And then, like anything like b6 weakens this knight. And he elects to trade his knight. I take back with the pawn. He plays rook c8, grabbing the open file. I play bishop e3, giving up this pawn, but with plans of taking either of these pawns if he does take the e-pawn. And, like I'm just behind the development here too, right? Like the opening's not gone perfect for me. So I do play bishop e3. He plays b6. And then I play rook c1, challenging the open file. He trades. And I go back with the bishop because, going with the queen, I think he just plays something like king h7 or knight f5, defending his h6 pawn, which I have a battery on. And then he's going to just play something like queen d7, rook rook c8 and grab the open file. And so my bishop's going back to c1, which this is very common in a lot of openings where the rook is out of there, so you're not locking your rook in. And the bishop's a great piece on c1. It defends b2, it exerts pressure on h6, and so it's fine there. He plays knight d7. I bring my knight back into the game, right? The knight has no future over here anymore, so let's bring it back into c3, where at least it puts pressure on the d pawn. He plays rook c8, and I play a4. Again, I'm not really sure like what my plans are here. Like maybe something like rook e2, rook d2, trying to put pressure here, but he could just play rook d8. And so I play a4, kind of with the idea of playing knight b5, knight d6, maybe just trying to get the knight in the position. Not even really something I'm sure I want to do because, you can sack for this pawn and then win my knight. But a4, gaining some space, perhaps threatening a5 one day. He responds a6, which is also a reason I played a4 because like I knew if he went for a6, at least he weakens this b pawn. And now I go back to e3, again tempting him to grab this pawn where I'm going to nab one of these. And he took on e5, and from afar I saw that there was a trick he could fall into if he didn't, calculate a little bit deep, which is me taking on h6, right? Because okay, which pawn to take, right? Like, this is a discussion. So taking on b6, something like this can happen, and I just lose a pawn, right? I'm just down a pawn. Not really what I'm trying to do. I don't really know what I have for it. I do have the bishop pair, so like I'm probably fine because black doesn't have a dark squared bishop. They have dark squared weaknesses, so like maybe I can mate my opponent somehow by like bishop here and getting my queen here, something like that. But I saw that taking on h6, if he's greedy and he tries to grab this pawn, which he did, and then he grabs the pawn again. Well, that's just the blunder because of queen d4, threatening checkmate and hitting your rook, right? You can't move your rook, you can't save your rook, or you get mated. And your only response to stop checkmate is knight f5, where yes, you fork my queen and bishop, but of course I just win the exchange here. If my opponent had not been as greedy and also just had like, I guess, a little bit better positional understanding, they would have either done bishop g7, right? Like bishop g7 here. And okay, they're fine. Like they have an isolated pawn, so they're still a little bit worse in my mind, but that pawn can also be a benefit of yours. Or they would have take, and then not taken with the rook and just said, okay, I play something like knight f5, I chase your bishop out, and then they're going to exert pressure on my weak c pawn, where I have these weak pawns now myself. But he did fall for the trick, and I grabbed the exchange, and then I played queen b4. I did realize after that, like, I just moved too quick here because queen e3 hits the b pawn and the knight, where king g7, I pick up a pawn, and now with just tied pawns, I'm just up a clean exchange, pretty easy win. And then like queen e3, if you move your knight, I just take the pawn again. There's really no threats to worry about. So definitely move too quick here because I noticed this after. So even in game 25, got to pause a little bit deeper, but played queen b4 with the idea of pressuring b6. He played queen c7. I played rook d1, and he played knight f5, where, I mean, he just didn't calculate enough here, where I think he just intuitively thought bishop takes, rook takes, queen c1, king g2, queen c6, and he probably just thought from afar, like, oh, this is good for me, right? Like, I'm pressuring the rook. It's lined up with the king. I'm pinning it to the king. I have ways of putting pressure on the rook here. But I did, before I nabbed this free pawn, I calculated this line pretty deep because, of course, I'm winning the exchange. I'm already up the exchange, right? Like, I can play slow moves like rook b1 and probably just be better. But I wanted to make sure that I'm still winning after all this. So what I calculated was I played queen e4 here, and yeah, what black just doesn't have any moves against this, right? Like first off, I'm threatening rook d8 check, discovering an attack on the queen and winning the queen. And what he played in the game, which was knight d6, all I do is I simply play queen f3, where now my queen is defended by the king. I also probably could have played something like queen d4, but my rook is still pinned then. And so I play queen f3. He plays king g7. I play rook d4, offering a trade. This would be very easily winning if we could trade queens. He plays queen c5. And then I force a trade of queens with queen d5, where I double attack the knight. There are no checks to my king. And, if you move your queen, you lose your knight. So you have to trade queen some way, either by take, and moving your knight, or what he did in the game, which was knight b7. I can't take this because I lose my rook. And so I just traded queens. He plays knight takes, and I play rook b4. And I mean, this is a winning endgame. It's not the most simple in the world because he plays knight d7, and like if I could just like chase this knight away and win this pawn, okay, very easily winning. But it's a little bit complicated. So I first play f4, just wanting to restrict movement of the knight, taking away the e5 square. The knight is just stuck here, right? Where like maybe I have time to play something like rook d4, rook d6, but he gets his king in the game. I do the same. He gets his king over to the queen side. And now I start pushing my other pawns because, my rook is a very mobile, fast piece. It could play all over the board. So ideally what I want black to have to deal with pressure over here and pressure over here where his pieces are just too slow, right? He doesn't have any long range pieces. And I want to do that and eventually just win the end game like that. So he plays king d6. I play h4, trying to create a passed h pawn. He plays king c5. I play rook b2, wanting to stay on the b file to keep the king out. He plays knight f8. I play h5. He takes. We trade. He plays knight e6. I play h6, forcing him back to f8, where like he's just gonna try to chill here. And my king can't infiltrate easily. But I do play king g4. He plays b5. I trade. And so now like I do have some things to think about, right? Like he has this b pawn, which if I am not to the point, he can just slowly force up the board, forcing me to sack my rook. And so either I needed to like bring my king back and chase the king away and win the pawn here with the knight stuck babysitting, or I need to find a way to just win material and force this pawn through. And so I play rook c2, checking the king, right? Like if the king goes in front of the pawn, okay, now you're one step slower to castling, and I can always come behind the pawn to sack the rook. And after king d5, king f5, keeping the king out of the game, no checks to worry about from the knight, knight h7, and then simply rook c7. And the point is, I'm just going to be in time to like take and always come back. And now you're going to have to worry about my king getting in there with this guy. And I still have this pawn as well. He plays b4. I take on f7. He plays b3. And, I calculate accurately here, just making sure that there's no funny business. But I realize that take king c6, a good try, right? Trying to stop me from getting behind the pawn. Something like rook h8 would just be met with king b7. But I simply play rook g7, because the point is if you play b2, I just play rook g1. And now I'm going to queen, and I'm just going to capture your pawn. And so we play a couple more moves, and he does resign. And so I am 2-1 going into my last round game against very common opponent on this channel, Lubo G, who is 2100. We seem to play every tournament. I am again playing with the black pieces, so I think I've had 4 whites against him, where I've had some good, like I won the first game ever against him with white. I think I lost the next one. We drew last week. Maybe I lost one more, won one more, drew one more, but we've played a lot of games as black. So he played d4. I told him before this game that I booked up heavily on h4, which was a lie. I just didn't want him to play it. So I'm not done well against it. So I played knight f6, the king's Indian, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, bishop e2, castles, and h4. And so he delayed going h4 in this one. Um, and knowing that, like, basically, if you followed the channel, he had a bad result against me, it playing like a more normal line, so he seems to be avoiding it. Um, and h4, like, I've not played well against, so I don't know if I need to delay castling against or just book up a little bit better against the specific line. Um, Castle's h4, and here I decided to play h6, right? With the main idea being that, like, when you play h5, I play g5, and yes, my light squares are left weak, but I've stopped the kingside attack for now because I don't know. Again, just like I've had some bad blitz results against this, whatever. I just think this is actually nothing to worry about. With with h5, where it's just nothing to worry about, right? Like, just takes, and okay, yeah, sure, you have an open rook, but there's no immediate mate threats, right? Like, h5 was the first one we played. I think I played c5 in one of them. h6, the engine never likes this move. It's like, it's not losing, but it's not good. And then he plays g4. So it's like, oh, God. Now I have to worry about g5. I have to worry about h5. I do respond with e5. He plays g5, and I play knight h7. And, like, yeah, the opening's already not gone well. h5 could be coming. He takes on h6. Of course, I can't take back because of the bishop. So I have to play bishop f6. He takes on e5. I take on e5. He takes with the queen. And I pretty much have to capture back with the bishop. If I take with the rook, I think my c pawn being tender to things like knight d5 are just going to be an issue. And so I take back with the bishop, protecting my c pawn. He plays knight f3, knight c6, bishop e3, bishop g4, knight g5. He really wants me to take and give him this protected h pawn. I viewed this pawn as like my friend, where, okay, yeah, it's here, but I'll always have time to get it, I thought. And, it just stops the rook from seeing my king. And I trade bishops, and then I play knight d4. And like, for the opening not going great, I think the dust settling here, like, I felt pretty good. I just think things have gone a bit better for me. And he took on d4. I take back, and he played knight b5. My original intention, like, and here is where I had my deepest think of the game, where I'm thinking about playing. Like, my first intention against this was just c5. If that's what I was planning to do, thinking that, okay, I have this protected pass pawn. But then once the position got here, I was like, wait a second. Like, b4 might be coming, undermining me. This d6 square, the knight's getting into. Like, is this as good as me as for me as I thought? And then the other things I calculated was, like, c6 here, take, and then maybe like bishop f6 or something. I also calculated capturing the knight with both pieces and then taking back. I think both have their merits, right? Where taking with the bishop and then taking with the knight, you exert pressure on e4. And so, like, if he takes back like this, I can take here. And if he plays something like this, maybe I defend my pawn. And yeah, I'm still well, our pawns are tied, and I think this pawn's like weak, right? Like, I think I'm just going to be able to eventually win it. Turns out that line wouldn't be too great for me because I think he takes on c7 first, which I thought this was all good for me, but I think it's just not, with like this check and h7 coming. And so after a while, I decided to do knight takes, pawn takes, and bishop takes. And my thought was, yes, I'm still down a pawn, right? One 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But he's going to take here. So I'm down one pawn. However, I thought, okay, this H pawn is weak. Like that pawn's not something to worry about. Even if like this pawn is left in the game, like that alone won't beat me. And then I also thought just like me having a bishop is an advantage compared to the knight, where there's pawns on both sides of the board, so the bishop has to be the better piece. Um, and what I originally intended was knight takes d4 and bishop f6, where maybe I should just play king h7 here, just stopping ideas of this pawn ever being pushed to h7, which can be annoying for me because like I want to respond with king g7 and then just like winning the pawn like that. But yeah, I think maybe I should just play king h7 and take things a little bit slow. But I responded bishop f6 with the idea of putting pressure on b2, putting pressure on d4. And he played rook d1. And again, my original tension was like c5. But then I realized he could just play like knight c2. And me grabbing on b2 is met with like bishop b1 and him invading with his rook, which just seems very bad for me. I have all these isolated pawns. And so and I also debated just playing like c6 right now. Just like, okay, let's not worry about the knight going forward at all. It can only go backwards. And then, again, we're going to just win this pawn slowly. We're going to get our rooks in the game. Seems fine. But I played rook e8, putting pressure on the e4 pawn. He responded f3, defending it. I played rook d8, putting pressure on the knight. And now I played knight b5, and I played c6 with the idea that, like, if you take here, your knight is trapped. And if you go like, something like knight takes c3, I can double your pawns. And like, yeah, I'm down a pawn, but I don't think this is losing. Seems like a pretty easy draw to hold. But what I didn't like realize how dangerous was how dangerous knight d6 was until the move played. And so it turns out that the move I have to play here is bishop e5, defending c7, giving me time to play a6 and chasing this knight out. Where, like king e3, threatening f4, I can play a6, and, like something like this, I could sack and take, and I'm still down a pawn here, but again, this pawn's weak, this pawn's weak, these pawns are doubled, so probably a pretty easy draw with rooks and pawns. But yeah, I didn't realize how dangerous knight d6 was for me, so I played c6, bishop d6, and now I realized that I am in a little bit of trouble. So I responded rook e7, because the issue here for me is like, I don't know if I play like something like I have all sorts of issues, right? Where it's like rook d7, h7 check. So this pawn I left is becoming the bane of my existence. King g7, and yeah, there's just all sorts of like sacrifices here. So I played rook e7, thinking I'm defending f7. He played h7. Again, my original intention was king g7, but this just loses because why is this lose? He can just take on f7, and if I take his rook, he promotes to a queen. And if I take his knight, he takes my rook, and he promotes to a queen, and I lose the rook. And if I take here, he again trades and promotes. So yeah, like this pawn is just promoting by force. So that's why I'm forced to play king h8. And now I still have issues with f7, where I mean, like, I'm okay for now with my bishop defending the rook, but all my pieces are just tied down. He plays c5, cementing his knight in there. I play I don't think rook c7 was played. I thought I played rook d7. I claimed in my notation rook c7. I'm pretty sure that's just a misprint by me. I'm pretty sure my rook's on d7, but and then yeah, I noticed that e5 is a tactic that is just going to crush me. I think he could have even played it last turn. With the point being take, something like take, check, king moves, and again, promote. So just all sorts of sacking the knight problems for me. Um, and so I lost this game after e5. I think we played a couple more moves. We got here, and I eventually lost. But so I don't know. This game's a tale of two halves. I definitely need to just like this position here. I just need to have a better plan against this system. Whether that being playing h5, playing c5, the thematic idea is that when you're being attacked on the flank, you need to counter in the center with the idea that they just don't have time to checkmate you if you're ripping open the center, right? Causing problems. And so I just need to get better at these positions. And then, the game, even though things didn't go well for me, like it's still like a pretty objective draw here if I find bishop e5. Where yeah, like I'm down a pawn, but I have the better minor piece. There's two rooks on the board. This is your extra pawn, this h6 pawn, right? And so like yeah, I'm probably just gonna draw, right? Like you have a weak pawn. You might make me suffer for a while, but like eventually my pieces are gonna get in there, and yeah, I just don't think I'm gonna lose if I play bishop e5. Because yeah, like anything like h7, rook g7 now is the plan. And so just not seeing how dangerous knight d6 was a major miss on my part. Not really considering knight d6, honestly. Just thinking that like, oh, I just chased that away, no problem at all, and not seeing the tactics coming here with sacking on f7 and h7 combined. So a good win for Lubo, a so-so tournament for me, right? Like I lost the two 2100s, I beat the two lower rated players, which like okay, all fine and dandy, but like results oriented, really didn't like this game I was blown off the board. So terrible game. I think I will be better in the long run though, because I'm gonna stop playing the Scandi. And then this game, much closer game against Lubo, but didn't just fell apart tactically at the end. So was a better loss than just getting destroyed out of the opening for sure. Hope you guys appreciated this. Please make sure to like and subscribe. I will have more videos coming, such as like how I went from 1200 USCF to 1900 USCF, like in a year and 4 months, and just like general chess improvement videos. Peace out.